Newman could see that his throat and face had been severely slashed, while his arms were covered with knife wounds as though he had put up a desperate fight to live. Both officers continued down the hall to Kevin's parents' room. There, they found Tom Haynes lying on his back on the bed, eyes staring up at the ceiling, deep stab wounds to his chest. At the end of the bed, curled up in the fetal position, lay Lisa Haynes. Lisa was still warm, and for a moment, Newman hoped she might be alive, but then he saw the deep gash on her throat. All three were dead. Detective Alan Lead grabbed the phone on the second ring when the 911 dispatcher called a little after 3 a.m. The 57-year-old detective called himself the old dog of the Manheim Township Police, and he had plenty of experience answering emergency calls in the middle of the night. Bald and bespectacled, Lead could pass for a high school teacher, but in reality, he was a hardened investigator who had just finished investigating a shooting at a local tavern the day before. He was also a veteran of the Vietnam War who had learned a valuable lesson a long time ago: treat people the way you would want to be treated. The other detectives looked up to Lead, and they often went to him for advice about their cases. The dispatcher told Lead that something terrible had happened at 85 Peach Lane. Lead did a double-take when he heard the address. Peach Lane was in one of the most peaceful and pleasant neighborhoods in the whole town, an area where police were seldom called. He asked the dispatcher if it was some sort of domestic disturbance, and they just said, "No, that's not what happened. You'd better get over there." Lead knew that the crime scene unit was poring over the crime scene, cataloging all the evidence. They didn't need Lead's help with that. He could check out the scene later. Right now, Lead needed to talk to the only surviving witness, Maggie, and by now, Maggie was on her way to the police station. So Lead got dressed, jumped in his car, and headed into the office. Maggie was already in an interview room talking to another detective when Lead arrived, and the detective excused himself to brief Lead on how it was going. The whole conversation was making him uncomfortable, the detective said. Maggie seemed relaxed and chatty, and she kept talking about her family in the present tense, as though they were not dead. The detective said she didn't seem like a woman who had just lost her entire family. Lead looked through the one-way glass into the room where Maggie was still sitting, occasionally looking up and smiling in their direction. Other times, she smoothed her hair and sat with her hands folded on her lap, as though she was just awaiting instructions. The other detective was right. She certainly did not seem heartbroken. But Lead said that the most important thing they could do right now would be to get as much information out of Maggie as they could. For all they knew, the killer could be planning to strike again, so time was of the essence. He asked the detective to get a written statement from Maggie that included everything she could remember about the evening, no matter how minor it seemed to her. The tiniest detail could turn out to be a critical clue. So the detective set Maggie up with a laptop computer and gave her an assignment. Tell us what happened. And Maggie took it to heart, typing page after page about everything that took place since she returned home from college. She wrote about the TV shows she watched and how her parents didn't understand the TV show Grey's Anatomy. She wrote about doing a crossword puzzle with her mother, and she wrote about the score in the Phillies game that she watched. But when Maggie got to the moment that she heard screaming from her brother's bedroom, her account became less and less specific. She never saw the intruder. She didn't realize her parents had both been stabbed, even though she was in their bedroom with the lights on, and she never investigated what was causing all the noise in her brother's bedroom. When she needed to describe her reaction to learning that her family was dead, she wrote simply, quote, "and you know the rest," end quote. Lead and the other detectives didn't know what to think. Some details in Maggie's statement were touching, depicting an unusually close family. But it's a basic principle in police investigation that when a witness fills their statement with irrelevant details, they may not be telling the whole story. Lead didn't think of Maggie as a suspect, but it did seem odd that the killings came just 2 days after she returned home from college and that she was miraculously spared. It was also strange that she had seen so little of the loud, bloody attack unfolding all around her in her home. But Lead thought to himself that Maggie's performance was so bad that she had to be telling the truth. After all, if Maggie was connected to the crime in any way, wouldn't she put on a major display of grief to cover her tracks? As dawn broke over Manheim Township, Lead was facing perhaps the most appalling murder case in his town's history, and he had little more to go on than the quirky personality of the lone survivor.